No glasses today, Britt.
I forgot them at work. I'm still getting used to it.
Everybody got their pajama bottoms on still?
Yeah.
Tom, they put you back in the hole. Under the
Yeah,
stairs.
it's I call it the Harry Potter room, but the view's not too bad. Like, I don't know if you can see it, but it
Oh,
looks, yeah,
well, that's pretty good.
yeah.
I have birds feeding out my window on this side. So if I keep looking over there, it's not referring to my notes. I'm watching the birds feed.
Good to know you plan to be focused.
Okay, I've got 4:30, guys, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. And note to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. A motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Mr. Chalmers, seconded by Councillor Anderson. All in favour? None opposed. Motion carried. I presume there's no public comment, Elise?
That's correct. There is no one signed up.
Okay, so we'll move straight into presentations and reports. I'm not sure, it's Fraser speaking first or Nyla?
I think it's me, Mayor McMaster, so I'll just jump in as directed by Nyla, and we'll try to pick up exactly where we left off last night. My name is Fraser Work. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works for the District of Tofino, and I'll be carrying on and continuing our presentations from last night, which is the final slides in the Public Works section of my budget portfolio, and moving on towards the utilities once that's complete. I'll just share my screen here and move over to the PowerPoint. Just bear with me for 1 second, please. All right, I should have a Mackenzie Beach overview slide in full slide view there. I see some nodding faces, so I'll just pause quickly before leaving the Mackenzie Beach Road discussion that was largely concluded yesterday evening, just with a comment that the CFO had mentioned, where this was a project slated for early budget approval, and based on the conversations last night to progress this project to shelf ready, continue to look for funding opportunities, and to make sure that we're ready to implement this project quickly. The recommendation would be to leave that engineering design and tendering preparation line item, which is 31,000, as an early budget approval, moving the rest to reserves to be accessed through any financial plan amendments if opportunities did arise. And then we would have that, in actuality, we would have that shelf ready for jumping on if the opportunity presented itself. So if that's council's wishes through the mayor, I would recommend that course of action in addition to what was discussed yesterday, and we'll take that forward unless there's any other commentary.
Anyone from council have anything to add or question? Speak up, because I can't see you, so.
Yeah, just do we plan on, in the 5-year plan, does it end up showing up as a project for 2022, or is it just sort of hanging off in the future anywhere.
Through the mayor, I think that we would be progressing as part of another budget recommended way forward to have that prioritization, condition assessments completed, and move that as a priority in 2021. And then we would be in a position to work that into the budget based on what that teaches us, and report back as part of the 2022 financial planning process of exactly where staff would recommend that sits, understanding and informed by the discussion that we've had thus far. And I'll stop there in case Nyla wants to jump in on those comments. Okay.
I'm glad, I'm happy with that for now. I'd like to see it done before the end of this council term though.
How about you, Councillor Steer?
No, I'm fine with the recommendations.
Councillor Chalmers? I think she's nodding her head.
Well, I would still like to see it go forward, but I was outnumbered, so I will support the council's decision.
Okay, I think you heard that loud and clear, Fraser.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll go back to share screen here. Oops, didn't do it. I'll get a little bit more used to my sequential button pressing here. I'm still feeling a little bit awkward. Okay, here we go. So the next project in the project sheets and on my slide presentation is the Olson Road storm main. This is a project which would reestablish an effective storm sewer along the easterly frontage of, this would establish a storm sewer as per the earlier 2012-13 project that runs down Olson Road to get water from upland sources across the down into the ocean again. We've got this one at about 90% design. This one was estimated, I think, in earlier 2019 to be somewhat less. I think it was 343,000 was the last financial plan number that council would have seen. There is an archaeological sensitivity at this site based on the excavations that we've made in the past in order to put in water main projects. So this is the project that actually upgrades that storm sewer that was originally planned for about 9 years ago. We have reestablished the permitting processes and the archaeological monitoring and the design so that we can move forward with this in 2021 and get that drainage sorted out in that area, which has been an ongoing issue for some time. The 4th Street to Gibson Street storm and sidewalk is a design that we also progressed in 2020, which was a project that was identified as a priority to mitigate some of the flooding and the standing water that we often see alongside the school frontage near the baseball fields along 4th Street. This project requires us to reestablish an effective storm sewer along the easterly side of 4th Street and connect it to the storm main to move it down Gibson's and back towards the outfall. This project would have another additional storm sewer that would intercept the water that is at the low point of that cedar stand on the school frontage and also tie that water into the storm main and get it into the drainage system. We have been in conversations, as mentioned at the Q3 report, I believe, where we've been in discussions with the school. They have some drainage issues of their own. They're looking and talking to us about what they may want to do in the future to make sure that they can actually move water from their school grounds into our systems. So we are in conversations with them. At this stage, I believe that we can move forward in 2021 with the implementation of the storm sewer project. And in 2021, we would plan with them what we would like to do in the future as far as expanding or connecting to any school ground infrastructure for drainage, as well as what kind of designs will work as we look at adding a sidewalk and pedestrian amenities in that zone that complete the network and linkages between the city street sidewalks and the baseball fields and the sporting fields. So those are this project includes us moving forward with the storm drain upgrades in 2021, focusing on some design work for future sidewalks and making sure that we move forward without having to introduce any rework to the infrastructure that we put in the first phase. So right now, I feel confident that we'll be able to fix a lot of those issues we've had with the standing water. It might be good to mention to council that with using district forces in late last year, just before Christmas, we actually put in a storm catch basin along the Gibson Road frontage of the school near the four-way stop. And that intercepts a lot of the water that moves overland that was actually rounding the corner and going down forth and collecting in that low point underneath the cedar stand. I would guess that that little piece of improvement would have mitigated the amount of water that was collecting in that low point of the road and potentially adding flood risk to neighboring properties in a meaningful fashion. But we know from some of the major storms where we saw, I think, about 75 mil of waterfall in 3 hours, that more infrastructure is still required in that area to make sure that it's protected from what is the common winter storm cycles and the amount of rainfall that collects in that low point, being fed from both overland and underground sources. The plan is still, Mayor and Council, to move quite quickly through these slides, as I have a fairly big bucket full of information and content to cover. So I'll rely on the Mayor to stop me and interrupt if we ever need to go back and talk about anything, and please do so wherever required. The culverts and drainage project sheet covers what is a few interventions that we really want to make in order to improve our storm sewer network. We've recently experienced some failures. The old metal or corrugated metal pipes that are in the ground, they do fail over time and collapse or get clogged and can't be freed or unobstructed. That does add a risk to local flooding in and around private and public property. We have some jobs, and when we have some of those replacements that are complicated by other infrastructure that's just adjacent to, we may need to excavate, hold a hydro pole in place using some expensive contractor supports, get in there and do the right repairs and excavations, and then tie that into the existing in-ground infrastructure on either end. In some cases, those aren't cheap projects. So we're looking at the 3rd and Gibson's project now, which you'll see some sandbags in the right-of-way. That's to direct some of that overland water that travels during storms and make sure that we protect those private properties and plan to replace that failed infrastructure in those areas. This funding line seeks to add annual healthy totals so that we can get in and do some of those priority projects. And while we work with MOTI to improve some of the drainage issues that are on their property along the highway right-of-way, that we share, of course, the risks and the management of those issues at the district level. So we are investing in some drainage upgrades, both by the partnerships as well as this funding line, and hope to be able to access some of those funds for priority repairs in the coming years. The fleet replacement plan includes a number of replacements and upgrades for old legacy vehicles that support different departments, with the lion's share of that being supported here at the Public Works Division. These are funds that are going to be allocated or recommended through the equipment reserve and reallocation of general surplus with a bit of taxation in future years. The capital replacement plan in 2021 focuses on priority replacements that have resulted already in a lower level of service or increased operations and maintenance costs and liabilities. We have some older fleet assets from early 2000s that are failing and that have to be removed for safety reasons off the road. We have some other assets that are from 2010 or so that are failing to be fit for purpose and need to be, and potentially will still be able to gain some trade-in value, but should be traded out for what we're recommending is a set of lightly used vehicles that are fit for purpose and right sized, avoiding, of course, those instances that I talked about late in 2020 where we have, in some cases, oversized vehicles that the way that we drive them in a small community is actually adds maintenance burden that we want to avoid wherever possible. So we're going to look at right sizing our fleet, introducing some more commonality. As council knows, maintaining our fleet often requires us to move across the island with those assets and resources in order to get them maintained. With some more commonality, we may be able to get access to maintainers that can come here, and we also get a little bit more efficiencies and economies of scale with the different dealerships or the maintainers that are either in Port Alberni or Nanaimo area. So this plan includes a set of those replacements, significant budget investment here, but really important for us to maintain those levels of service. This section is summarized financially in the next couple of slides. And what these slides show is the 2021 and onwards series of revenues for this particular slide, which includes transfers from different sources, which of course dictate those titles. So you see in 2021, a significant portion of a work supported by transfers from reserves. And then we see that taper off in the next couple of years. I should mention that the out-year planning is, of course, a little bit less robust than what we see in front of us for 2021. And it is my, of course, responsibility to make sure that I continue to add detail and granularity in the years beyond the first year in front of us to make sure that we continue to plan and manage our budget and financial planning process to the highest standard. We're looking at the revenue slide here, which is, of course, dominated by those transfers rather than revenue sources. I'm not the most revenue-rich business around town here, and I'm mainly an expense, and that's really represented in these slides. The staffing and administrative costs is affected by some recent staffing increases, which we've turned temporary staff that have been with us for quite some time into full-time equivalent positions in order to maintain services in the utilities, as well as that's captured in the following slides, but here also janitorial labor positions to make sure that we can maintain cleanliness and levels of service across public and corporate facilities. So those slides are summarized here, and I'll keep moving. The second slide for expenses captures those other budget funding line items and are there for council's review and consideration. And our more detailed summaries, of course, are in the financial plan Excel spreadsheet, which has a much more granular representation of these different areas. I will go through the same information, of course, in my water and sewer utilities, and we'll talk a little bit about that as the rate increases have already been part of our recent discussions with council, and will be part of discussions next week again. So I'll touch on those points as we move forward. So moving on to water. The first item is the addition of a rechlorination station at the DL117 reservoir, which is just near here out the back of Industrial Way. This reservoir floats on the system, which is the way some of the engineers talk about it, where the elevation of that particular reservoir doesn't introduce water as readily as it would from Stump Dump or Bars Mountain. That means that some of this water can sit for a little bit longer. And before we introduce it in the system, we have to ensure that chlorine levels are safe, as it's stored water that has previously been chlorinated. And we have to make sure that it maintains those chlorine residual standards so that it can be effectively potable water. We have had to do that manually when we reintroduce this water in the system. And in order to add an automatic chlorination system that rechlorinate it as it goes into the distribution mains would basically mirror the same capability that we currently have at the Stump Dump location. So very large reservoir, and that capability would be sort of considered standard for the way that the infrastructure is configured. We've set aside some monies that are akin to what we spent the last time, and we're gathering quotes from different service providers at this time. The DCC technical report is a key component of our overall asset management and financial management planning. And the last time that this was updated was about 12 years ago. And the intention is, as council has heard before, was just to get that document modernized so that we can identify those projects which will be eligible and attractive for DCCs, and then we can allow a much more pointed planning and management of funds as we go forward with the different capital projects. The Bay Street water treatment upgrade is also a known project to council, and was previously identified in the financial planning processes in 2019 for the 2020 budget. We've been working with consultants to conclude the design process, and we're nearing completion of the Bay Street new UV treatment capability, which would be the second to last identified treatment capability that we wish to introduce at the Bay Street. The remaining one after this would be an additional filtration method, which we're still working with Island Health to find out when and to confirm that we will need something like that in the future. This UV provides secondary disinfectant or treatment of the water at the Bay Street location and requires us to introduce and integrate UV array into that system. The original intent was to create another building just adjacent to the current infrastructure to house the equipment. But the architectural, structural, civil, and different electrical mechanical costs associated with a standalone building had a cost premium of an additional $1 million. We've removed that and integrated it to within the current system, and this also includes an on-road, on the highway generator, which provides backup power to the Bay Street location, which council may know now that is currently not in place, and any backup power that has to be provided for pumping or even water treatment right now has to be done through portable genset, delivered and monitored and managed by Public Works staff in the event of a power failure. So this gives us added capability from a treatment perspective, and also important added capability from a resilience or backup power perspective. The backup generator is a significant portion of overall costs, coming in at around $350,000, but will provide us with both pumping and electrical and mechanical backup power sources when those are required. And on the West Coast here, that's not an uncommon phenomena. So this has, of course, been submitted as 100% funding potential for the Remote and Northern Communities Fund. And we should hear back on the outcomes from that grant award process in and around the summertime period, with a hopeful shelf-ready start as September 1st, I think is the published earliest start. It might be mid-September, but if I got that wrong, but it's in September. And fingers crossed, we'll be able to access those funds and avoid any costs to community for the capital investment. The District Water Master Plan has been identified as a priority within the asset management portfolio and has a price tag estimated at around $100,000 for 2021, which is a significant investment for us to be able to both develop the master planning process, which looks at community development, infrastructure on the private and both public sides, climate change, watershed management, and larger global kind of issues that pertains to our water system and source water here on the peninsula, as well as a very close look at integrating with an conventional asset management plan, which looks at all of our capital infrastructure, operations, maintenance, financial, and risk portfolios. That the hope here is that we actually spend somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 for this particular review, using engineer consultants that know our water system the best, that have a track record of investments and expertise that the district has used over generations of water engineering and hydrological consultant advice and management. So there are a lot of experts on the island that know the Tofino water system much better than I do. And my intent is to mind meld with all of them so that we can deliver a product that gives us the confidence that we have a 20 to 30 year investment strategy and plan that the community can support and get behind, and to give us the confidence that we're making informed decisions when it comes to development and infrastructure and investment. So again, the hope is to spend a little bit less money in 2020 than has been identified here, and that we would be able to stretch those dollars as far as possible in order for us to define that future strategy to manage our most important resource. The water utility includes a series of design in 2021, where the capital projects are really centered on the ones that were already in the hopper, like the Bay Street UV upgrades. And we would focus on design work for some of our asbestos cement water main replacements with more modern water main infrastructure. That was first identified in some of the 2012 Corps capital plan and capital investment plan reports. Those priorities still ring true. In some cases, we of course have to upgrade and update the cost estimates that were associated with those older reports to reflect more modern estimates. And in all cases, we have to design the projects to make sure that they fit within the other pieces of infrastructure and considerations in the community. The intent is to front end load these design projects so that we're in a position to implement the capital works in years following. The remote monitoring and telemetry may not necessarily be a well understood title, but what we're trying to do here is improve our SCADA control system. So we have a remote control and monitoring system that's fueled by sensor information and data that's integral to the systems themselves, and allows us to control and manipulate and monitor the system from remote locations, including tablets or computers here at Public Works. This system is essential for us to understand if we have any problems with the water system, how the performance of the water system, and to make sure that we can attune the system to faults or changes both remotely and locally. The the Mears Island adds the complications of having sensors and equipment on Mears Island that need to be beamed across via signals and radio signals to our systems here on the peninsula, which have to stand up to the weather and the damage that occurs at the Mears Island remote location. What that means is we have to have some costly sensors in the field that need to stand up to the elements, and we need to be able to replace those and monitor those, both that sit in reservoirs, sit in streams, sit in pipes, or sit on top of things to give us visual and video coverage of what's happening over there. I rely on the video camera sensors for Sharp Creek and Osmosis reservoirs on a daily basis, especially during summer drought periods. And I wouldn't be able to prioritize enough this type of investment, although we have to be very careful to control costs. The recommended level of investment for 2021 is $35,000, and then we should have a bit smaller investments in the years to follow as we start to solidify our system with which would be considered steady state. We also do not have a backup power generator for the Osmosis water treatment plant. This project had been identified as a priority many years ago in some of the capital water planning. And I seeked through the master planning and the asset management planning process, which was identified in a previous slide, to confirm the requirement for this as the best investment. And this is currently planned for 2022 and will be firmed up as far as a requirement and a design intent in our overall water utility planning in 2021. We've identified the generator replacement costs using our most up-to-date cost that we have at Bay Street, which is subject to a little bit more analysis. The number one creek water supply, council may recall that this source water was an emergency access to creek source water on Mears Island during a summer drought, I think in the 2009 timeframe. It's been talked about a little bit recently as a temporary set of infrastructure that has lasted maybe a little bit longer than it was ever intended to, but is an extremely important set of infrastructure on Mears to access water from the number one creek, which is spring fed and a very reliable source of water as far as our 4 creek sources on Mears. Husbanding and taking very, very delicate care of this particular asset is, I would suggest, of prime importance as far as our water sources go, as this has some of the highest low flows in the summer and some of the healthiest water sources on our Mears Island footprint. The Close Creek water supply has a tank that was first installed in the 80s and as it was also years ago recommended for some upgrades. We will be revisiting the plan for that this year as part of our asset management exercise, and we hope to be able to extend the life of that water reservoir and some of the infrastructure over there to last a little bit longer so that we don't have to replace that tank right away. We got an estimate this year for what it will cost to replace the Bay Street tank, which is planned for in future years, and a tank that cost $35,000 in 1985 cost $1 million in 2020. So the infrastructure exponential curve on costs is definitely felt here. And as soon as you put something on Mears Island, the cost premiums for remote work go up and up. So we want to stretch the life of this asset as far as we can, but within prudent risk profiles, and to make sure that we keep through life costs down and avoid any shocks. So this plan is really to extend the life of that facility. The Bay Street contact tank I just discussed. $900,000 for the tank and the installation if we do it well. So these are expensive things, and this is currently planned on the project horizon of 2025. Again, will be revisited during that master planning process this year. Crystal balling a little bit in 2025 as well, looking at water conservation efforts. Most municipalities are moving towards a network installation that allows water meters to be read via networks and be monitored remotely and in real time. This has direct benefits to identifying leaks in real time, to providing the visible water usage rates and identifying any problems and any system performance issues in real time. It's a bit of a looser estimate on the finances for this one, but we do have a smaller system and would require less infrastructure to have a wireless networked radio censored meter in the ground. But but we've actually just earmarked 2025 as a potential for this project, which we would also come back later in the next financial planning scheme, deferring that to later years if that was a prudent thing to recommend from a risk benefits perspective. The summary of the water utility includes the revenues slide here and the expenses slide. I would highlight, and I should have probably said it at the beginning of this section, that we see a larger set of expenses in 2021 on the operating side, which would be here, in order to clear some of the backlog of maintenance, to pay for incremental maintenance increases that have happened across all facilities and stations, to accommodate the new utility one person that we've got in the position now, which is an additional staff person from previous years, and to cover some of the engineering consultant and other costs in 2021 that in some cases, in many cases, are actually one-time costs, or one-time in this financial period costs. When I came in to the position, we automatically started reviewing the different areas where we had financial pressures in certain areas, or we felt like we were underfunded, and why, and what kind of flexible options we had to be able to still maintain levels of service and reduce risks within the funding envelopes that we had. And in some cases, the prudent recommendation was to add some funds to make sure that levels of service and safety and different risks were attenuated properly. The expenses there show capital projects loaded on the water side, and then of course that's being reviewed, as I've mentioned before, with the water master planning process and the asset management planning process that's integrated in that project. And the operating budget is affected there for what we see, and then what we went over with JP Jolly, who showed some of those issues, generally speaking, as a profile graphic to show what the 13% upgrade would have, followed by some rate hikes on both the water and the sewer utility, in order for us to continue to fund the operations and also make sure that we stayed in healthy limits. So on to my last portion of the presentation, which is the sewer utility, which is approximately the same number of slides as the water. There is an infiltration study and then its subsequent repairs, which we've deferred to 2022. This is an important sewer and stormwater project where we have surface and groundwater that actually is able to infiltrate our sewer connection, our sanitary sewer connections, either through illegal connections or sometimes breaks and roots infiltration in the ground. And that in some cases can result in very high proportions of flows into our sanitary sewer, which of course we will have to treat once we have the wastewater treatment plant up and running. Treating rainwater is an expensive endeavor if we're not careful, and also comes with capacity issues on the systems for pumping capacity and pipe capacity to convey that liquid across locations. So we're currently watching our numbers very, very closely when we have storm events, and we're seeing the I&I flows during heavy rainfall. We just don't know exactly how it's getting in the system yet, and we need to study that in order to reduce it and reduce the costs associated with it and reduce the risks associated with it. The lift station, I would go back to this one and just say that the planning for the through life capacity and any cost savings measures for the wastewater treatment plant moving forward will rely and be informed by this study, which is why it's important to do that as a priority within the next 2 years, so that it has a chance of being influencing the overall wastewater treatment project design and some of the upgrade projects that are considered and planned for the years to follow. The next series of upgrades all really are associated with end of life assets or out of capacity assets. This one here is basically the next set of lift station generator backup power improvements that we need, where the older generators are getting towards their end of life or unsafe to run at the current configuration. So we've seen that some of them, some brands are better than others. We've had some recent successes with some of our maintenance routines, and we need to keep replacing those generators as they're at end of life. The 2021 plan would be to replace the highest priority unit, which is unit 10, and then moving on to 2 replacements in 2022. And then the next slides that will show are revisiting some of the slides that were presented before I arrived at the district, which is increasing the capacity of the force main, the sewer force main south in the district to accommodate both the expansion of the communities that lay to the south from both a resort and the First Nation communities as they grow in that southern part of the town and south of our district boundaries, where we take sewage from those locations and convey it northwards towards the outfalls. We haven't got the designs done for these projects. They haven't been designed yet. And we also need to make sure that these are the right projects to do in the right way. While we talk about the wastewater treatment plant in 2021 with consultants in order to reduce the overall cost of that project while still delivering the capabilities on sewage treatment that we need, it is the right time for us to be designing and planning these projects to make sure that they are in fact required on the date that we're planning, that we have good plans for the interim, and that we have the right designs moving forward and the plans for their construction. This project in particular is not an insignificant project, estimated at over $2 million. If we were to do that project, the construction activities along the highway are also very significant. So we have to design and plan this properly well in advance and make sure that it makes sense with respect to the other construction activities and the burdens that we carry based on those at those times for things like wastewater treatment plants and other major resort developments. So careful planning is required, careful design, and making sure that this is the right project for us at the right time. So I would expect that we'll be back in front of council with specific dedicated reports on these projects based on their monetary value as well as their impacts to the community in both the fail to act or the implementation process itself. The lift stations to upgrade are along that capacity. So once we twin the force main, we need to, of course, upgrade the pump facilities to make sure that we can pump that fluid around. And that the next two slides are just the resultant upgrades that are required to realize that twinning of the force main. The wastewater treatment plant needs no introduction. As I just mentioned, we are working on the procurement strategy still to get that document on the street so that we can enter the next phase of planning, design work, and cost savings detailed project management work. Lots of discussions and meetings with the CAO are ongoing, and we hope to be in a position to get something on released to the two previous proponents here within the coming weeks. So working hard on this file to move forward in the way that demonstrates the highest potential for success for the district in order to minimize costs overall, recover our budget back as close to the 55 million as possible, but protecting and retaining our treatment performance and our long-term operating costs requirements, and making sure that we don't inadvertently trade or reduce capital cost for a through life cost burden, making sure that we control those wisely as we move forward. There was a last lingering slide that we kept in for this financial plan, which identified that when the wastewater treatment plant comes to be, there will be a fleet asset associated with that. And we'll probably roll this into the overall fleet management slides. This one would, of course, be a dedicated wastewater treatment plant vehicle. That said, it's a few years away right now, and we'll continue our planning. And when you compare it to the previous slide of 55 million, I won't give this any more airtime than it really deserves. The sewer revenues, obviously supported by utility rates, and those are under review. As I mentioned before, the CFO will talk more about these, I think, in her slide deck to follow, and will also be sitting in front of council with me next week to discuss, or is it the week after? I think it's the week after, to discuss the overall rate increase changes with a bit more details than we covered last week during our committee discussion. So the bulk of obviously my presentation has surrounded the projects themselves, the rationale, the need, and the considerations related to all of those, and then the detailed finances are highlighted here, which is again a summary of what is the granular level of detail in the financial planning document itself. And that is the end of my two-day marathon presentation for council. I'll stop sharing my screen and of course welcome any comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Fraser. That was quite concise and very informative. Any questions for Fraser? Councillor Steer.
Yeah, it's a more a comment. Thank you, Fraser, once again for a very comprehensive financial plan. The one thing that became glaringly obvious on many of the things that you reiterated was, particularly in the water area, was that master plan and that coming forward to kind of dictate and give us some direction over the next long-term financial planning for the replacement and or whatever is needed in that area. So I cannot stress enough the importance, and I'm sure everybody is quite aware of that, but it just became abundantly clear how important that plan is with the information that you gave on almost all of the projects related to water and to a certain extent sewer in there. So thank you very much.
Councillor Chalmers, you have anything to ask? No? Councillor Anderson?
No, thank you. It's looking like 21 is very much a catch-up year on a number of fronts in public works, and I'm glad to see that we have some really good planning going forward. It's very ambitious number of projects near the front end in this year in 22, and I'm wishing you all the best as we get through all this. Thank you very much.
I just have one minor question, Fraser, going back to Olsen Road. Did you say we have to do an archaeological study again, or will the one we did before suffice?
No, Mayor McMaster, we're good. The archaeological study that was done is prudent, and what we do is we retain the consultants to monitor to the recommendations that were established in that report.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, well, if there's no more questions or comments from council, I think we'll move on. Thank you, Fraser.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. Thanks to all the managers for presenting all the content they have so far. I'm going to move into my financial officer's report, where I will bring a more consolidated approach to the discussions. I will talk about on a consolidated basis all the projects that were presented over the last yesterday and today, as well as focus on the 2021 budget and also go over property taxation with some draft tax rates I've prepared. I will also take this opportunity today to talk about the utility rate increases that have been proposed to council with some sample calculations. And as the Director of Infrastructure mentioned, we will be coming forward to council at the February 23rd meeting with some more detailed information on those rate increases. So I'm just going to take a moment and share my screen. Okay, so hang on one second. I'm actually going to share a different document. I am going to go right into a larger document where I will show a consolidated look at the 2021 budget. The managers have carefully gone through all of their budgets, their line-by-line operating budgets, and in council's agenda package is the very detailed financial plan document where it does go line by line and provide more detail to what was presented on the slides. What this document does is it provides a look at the 2020 budget on its own. So it is a lot to go through. So I'm just going to highlight certain sections of the document and just remind us how to navigate this document, which is included in council's agenda packages. So along the left-hand side, we do have this document separated into the three funds: the general fund, which are these services here. They're all the services that the municipality provides outside of the water and sewer utilities. The water and sewer utility is shown down here. In this section of the document, we have all of the expenditures related to all of the service areas. And we have along the bottom here, the total expenditures for the 2021 budget at $20 million. The expenses are separated into the operating expenses, capital expenses, and transfers either out from the general fund to the water and sewer fund or transfers out to reserve funds or to other agencies. On the expense side of the spreadsheet, or the revenue side of the spreadsheet, we have multiple columns in here because we do have several revenue sources that are coming into the 2021 budget. The pink areas here, over here, and over here are all the amounts that we are taxing for 2021. The only thing that's excluded for taxation is the non-market change amount, which I'll go over later on in the presentation. So what this shows on this side is out of the $20 million in expenditures, 17% of those expenditures are going to be funded by taxation. And an almost equivalent amount, a little bit more, is funded by user fees and charges. So those are charges within all the service areas, development fees, building permit fees, any charges for recreation or programming, daycare, and those types of things, as well as the water and the sewer charges down here below. 23% of the revenues will be coming from grants, and 23% will be coming from reserve funds. And reserve funds are made up of RMI funds here, which is why this line item is showing so much higher than others, as well as reserve funds from previous year's taxation through the capital and infrastructure levy. This capital and infrastructure levy column is the amount that we are proposing to tax for the levy this year at $387,609. I will be discussing some options to modify those amounts with council, and that's a discussion that was had at the November budget meeting. The debt servicing column is with respect to the long-term debt, and I'll break that down in my presentation in a moment. So this document I like to provide to council definitely at this stage to show where all the revenue sources and expenditures are coming from for the year. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have on that document. You have had some time with it, so there may be some questions, and if not at this point, I can certainly move along and answer questions later on that.
Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, Nyla. This is the document that I find the most user friendly. I just the one question I did have was if there was the ability to send last year's just for me, just for a comparison, just to see, like for example, the 17% from taxation as compared to last year, the amount that I know I've got it somewhere in my file somewhere, but I'm sure yours is probably more handy. But at some point, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure, no problem. The document for last year is going to look quite a bit different. If council recalls, we did reduce several areas of taxation due to COVID, so that budget looks quite different. In the November budget packages that went to council, we included a comparison 2019, 2020, as well as 2021, and the comparatives against 2019 are far more similar than what you'll see for 2020. Yes.
Thank you. I forgot about that. I do have
No
it.
problem.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, carry on, Nyla.
Okay. Okay, so this is just a visual of those taxation columns in the consolidated document. I just like to provide this as another way to look at where the taxation dollars are going. It's no surprise every year we see the majority of taxation going to the area of public works. It's quite a large department. It is funding all the road and drainage requirements, as well as it has a large staffing complement and the expenses that go along with supporting an administration like that. And then we have the administration at 16%, which is an area of the organization as well that has several resources within it, and it also pays for some of the expenses that that provide support to the organization as a whole. So just an overview of the 2021 to 2025 financial plan, just looking at all 5 years. We do have a 2% tax increase showing for all 5 years in the plan. Just a reminder that last year we did not have a tax increase at all. We left it at 0% for the base rate of taxation due to COVID. That was one of the measures we put in place to ensure that we would consider the economic impact of COVID-19. The contingency is still set at 5% of the base level of taxation. We had quite a high contingency last year, given the uncertainty of the year, and we didn't know where we would be, where we would require funds in the various service levels. We have a very good idea of how to move forward in this year, given our experience over last year. So we feel comfortable with the 5% contingency sitting at $180,000. And so that will be our goal at about 5% of the base rate of taxation over the next 5 years. The plan that Council has in their agenda packages is a balanced financial plan. However, there are some years where we need to modify expenditures in the later years. We also need to modify some expenses in 2021, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But it is considered a balanced financial plan at this point, where there are adequate revenues for the expenditures that we are proposing. We did add some funds into the 2020 budget between last meeting and this meeting. We've added general surplus funds, and I'll show how those have been allocated a little bit later on. And the COVID Restart Grant funds that we received, I'll provide some detail on how we've applied those retroactively to 2020 and in years 2021 and 2022. And we've also reassigned some 2020 taxation for projects that were planned, not completed, and they'll be brought forward to this year. Those amounts at this time are considered unaudited and are subject to change. And we will bring forward those changes at a later date and prior to adoption of the financial plan. The non-market change amount is subject to change when we received our assessment, our revised role assessment. Right now we're working with a completed assessment role before BC Assessment has gone through their appeal process. So I have not included the non-market change revenue, but I do have an estimate of what those revenues look like based on the completed role, which I'll go over in a moment. I don't know if you had noticed, but when the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works was going over the operating expenditure slides, there was a line item referred to as DCC reductions. And so I just wanted to highlight that it is sitting in the financial plan for years 2021 to 2023. So the district has the ability, the Local Government Act allows us to, by bylaw, provide for reductions to development cost charges for certain uses if the definition is met as per our bylaw. So our current bylaw and the most frequent reductions that we do see are reductions of 50% for affordable housing and on-site employee rental housing. So the definitions do have to be met, and that a covenant has to be registered in favor of the district in order for this to occur. That's typically done in the form of a housing agreement. So in 2020, we saw reductions of $13,000. In 2021, we were expecting a reduction of about $57,000, and then we are anticipating some reductions in 2022 and 2023 related to the affordable housing developments on DL 114. At this time, these are estimates only for 2022 and 2023 and are certainly subject to change, but I wanted to start projecting these in the budget because they will or may have a financial impact with respect to taxation. At this time, I'm not proposing a tax increase in those later years to cover off those charges. I'm going to do my best to balance the financial plan and find a way to incorporate those into the expenditures to make sure that they balance out without having a tax increase. However, it doesn't mean that we won't need to do that. I just wanted to put these estimates on Council's radar at this point and include them in the plan. Just to be clear, when the reason why we have to include them in the financial plan is when we reduce for affordable housing and on-site employee rental housing. While it is allowed for us to do so, we have to make up that 15%, the 50% reduction that we are offering. So if all things remain the same and there's no amendments or changes to the development cost charge bylaw before 2023, this is how the financial impact would look for those reductions. So just moving on to the water and the sewer fund, for the most part over the 5 years, for the water and the sewer fund are balanced budgets. We have contingencies set at 10% of budgeted fees for all 5 years. There are some 2020 expenses that are moving over into 2021. And as we work on our year-end audited financial statements, those amounts will become clear. Before we adopt the financial plan, we will be sure to get those estimates in there. So at this stage of the presentation, I just want to introduce that I will be talking later on about in more detail about the utility rates. We are proposing a 13% increase to all fixed and variable fees, which is effective April 1st of 2021, if approved. The presentation came forward on February 1st at Council's committee or at the Committee of the Whole meeting. Since that time, I've had more of a look at the numbers and have been working on the financial plan. Originally, we thought we would have to make up for the lack of doing that increase in Q1. We will be using prior year surplus to make up for that for the 13% that we won't be able to capture in Q1 by prior year's surplus. We did receive higher than anticipated revenues in 2020. We reduced our revenue anticipation last year as a result of COVID, and we were surprised to see that we were actually able to collect all the revenue as originally budgeted. So we will be using some of those funds to bring forward, and then the 13% increase would apply on April 1st, 2021. So a little bit later on in today's presentation, I'm going to explain the rate review, what we've done so far, and how it's going to be a two-stage review, where we'll go from here over the next year. And then I'll go over the new fee schedules and some sample calculations so we can see what the impact is on the user. So this next part of the presentation will go over the COVID Restart Grant. So a couple days before our last budget meeting, we received notification that we were going to receive $822,000 under this granting program. And so the purpose of the grant it was indicated that it was for addressing any revenue shortfalls, responding and reopening to any facilities and all those operating costs, emergency planning and response costs, any bylaw enforcement and protective services such as fire and police, computer and electronic technology costs, which we saw quite a bit of last year, having to move to, we couldn't have in-person meetings, so we had to modify our systems here, and then services for vulnerable persons. So the management team did meet, as we have reported previously back to council, and had a look at the existing service areas and how these funds could be allocated. I also had a look at where we were at with our pandemic costs in 2020. As council is aware, we had a task number with Emergency Management BC where we were able to get some of the eligible costs covered through a claim process. Some of those claims won't necessarily all be approved, some were denied, and so some of those expenditures were certainly allocated to those areas. These grant funds are intended for operating. They're intended to help with services in the areas where we saw increased costs related to COVID or decreased revenues as a result of COVID. So that's what we had to look at across our existing service areas. We didn't look at expanding service areas in our response to COVID. That would be financially, it would not be feasible. We had to start looking in the areas where we do offer services and how those were impacted by COVID. And we were able to allocate all those funds successfully. So I will go over that now. So retroactively, we applied $253,114 to our 2020 operations. I'll go in detail on what these amounts are in a moment. In 2021, we allocated 355,000, and in 2022, we're allocating 213,000. So in 2020, I've separated this by service areas, the same service areas that we saw on that consolidated worksheet, just for just so it was easy to have a look at here. For administration, which includes financial services, corporate services, and council expenditures, we allocated 55,822. We had to undertake a series of hazard assessments to ensure that we could reopen facilities as well as have staff in all of our facilities. So there were some costs associated with that were not planned. There were some professional fees in order to do that work that we had to cover off. Legal fees we encountered during our emergency response to COVID within the EOC that were not covered off in the claim. Some repairs and maintenance that were required throughout the buildings in order to have staff work in a safe space during the pandemic, and we had to do several upgrades to computer and AV equipment. There were some staffing resources that were able to cover off, and that's across all service areas, and that's related to having our staffs that were in their more typical roles in their early stages of the pandemic move and go work in the Emergency Operations Center. EMBC will not cover those costs. They will cover the backfilling costs of those positions. However, the positions were not backfilled. We were kind of taking on both at the same time. We're in the early stages. We were just in the EOC. So those when you see wages and staffing resources across the various service areas, that's what that relates to. We were able to use some of these funds to cover off those costs. In protective services, we had signage and personal protective equipment we had to purchase to ensure that staff was safe and we could get messages out to the community. The Children's Center, there was some computer equipment to allow for electronic meetings and professional development to continue. In community sustainability, which includes areas of planning, recreation, and emergency planning, we purchased a subscription to online consultation software. We wanted to make sure we kept going with some of our key projects and continue with our consultations, such as the OCP, the budget process, and some of the downtown improvements that will be beginning. Personal protective equipment was required in the area of recreation and some of the other staffing. And then there were some ineligible expenses for the task number that were mostly coded here because it's where our emergency planning expenses go. Infrastructure and public works, we had a restart plan that we did a bit later on specific to the community hall, so those costs were covered with the grant. Additional janitorial resources which assist all facilities and throughout the community. It's no secret that we had to increase cleanliness and sanitization in all of our facilities, and we required the resources to do so. And the personal protective equipment was required to carry out those duties. And then in public spaces, we use for staffing resources as well, and signage. And so that total is 253,114. So then looking forward, we had to plan in the various service areas where we expected to see an increase in expenditures or a reduction in revenues, and supplement that with some of these grant funds. And the benefit of being able to do that, of course, is to ensure that the taxpayer isn't feeling that short-term burden of those costs and revenue shortfalls that we would see as a result of the pandemic. So in administration, we have minimal personal protective equipment for staffing and for the election that's about to come. Protective services, we are covering quite a bit in this area. The 2 reservists that we are proposing for the summer, for the busier months, as well as an additional temporary bylaw enforcement officer and personal protective equipment for the fire department. So 140,000 is allocated there. In community sustainability, We'll continue to subscribe to the online consultation platform. And we are anticipating that there could be some potential revenue loss with recreation, but having to modify the type of recreation that we are providing in this type of pandemic environment, we may see a reduction in revenue, but we still require the staffing to be able to react quickly and change the type of programs that we are offering. So we are covering some staffing costs there in anticipation of some potential revenue loss, and that's $86,380. In infrastructure and public works, we're going to continue to cover some of our janitorial resources that we've put in place to ensure we move through this pandemic safely and ensure that all of our facilities are in the state that they need to be in safely. And tools, we've had to increase some of our equipment and tools due to not being able to share some of the things, and then increase vehicle maintenance. We are seeing an increase in maintenance and repairs are anticipating that. We're having to spread out the employees and make sure that they don't share vehicles as much, and they're going to be used more rigorously and likely require more maintenance throughout the year. So there's $130,000 in that service area. So that's totals $355,713. In 2022, we're going to continue to fund some of the areas that we see as high priority, and we certainly have heard from the community in this regard to put resources towards bylaw enforcement after the 2020 busier months. And so we're going to continue to fund 2 reservists as well as more temporary bylaw enforcement during those times. In infrastructure and public works, we're going to put the grant resources towards janitorial as well. So that's $78,000, so a total of $213,173. This was a new topic, so I could pause here for a moment to see if council has any questions regarding those grant funds before I move on.
Any questions for Nyla? Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I'm wondering, does the district have any role to play in the vaccine rollout for COVID? Do we anticipate, I don't know, opening the community hall for a week or so, or anything like that?
Mr. McPherson?
So we have been approached by the province to see what facilities are potentially available. I hope it's fairly obvious that we'll do whatever we can to facilitate vaccine distribution in Tofino. We do have the only standing commitment that we have for the community hall at this point is provincial court is now run out of there. And we're waiting for more detail from the province on what they need in terms of how much time they'll need at different times throughout the vaccination period, and we'll make that a priority and try and work with court as well so that we can make that happen. I understand that the province is also approaching other property owners in town as well, so it sounds like they're trying to develop lots of options for themselves.
Okay. I'm just wondering if it's anything that the restart money needs to be allocated for anything associated with that, but it sounds like it'll be funded separately.
Yeah, I don't even know if this is one of those things where I think we're in the early stage and trying to just assure them that we have the facility ready and available. And whatever fees are required, we'll sort that out later, however that's funded, is very, very much a secondary question at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chalmers?
Not a question, but do you mind if we take a very quick 2-minute break?
No, we can take a 2-minute recess. So. Okay, I think everybody's back. If you want to proceed, Nyla.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just, if Councillor Steer had any questions before you carry on.
Sure.
No, he's fine.
Okay, I'll just share my screen again here. Okay. There we go. Okay, so the next slide is that other revenue source that we are bringing into the budget, and we do this every year. If we tax in 1 year we don't spend the funds as originally planned, or the project may carry forward over 2 years, then we bring those funds forward and spend them in the current year. So again, I've separated it by service area just to make this easier to look at, and it provides some descriptions of and summaries of what the expenditures are. So in administration, we had some consulting fees that were not used, so we are bringing those forward to continue on with those projects of $62,325. In protective services, legal fees is something that we estimate from year to year. Sometimes we use them and sometimes we need more. Sometimes we don't use them or we use less, and so when we budget those amounts, we do bring them forward because they are significant enough to do so. Bylaw review was not completed, so we're bringing those funds forward as well. There's some training dollars in the Children's Center. It is minimal, but we are supporting an employee through certification, so we'd like to bring those forward to use this year. In infrastructure and public works, we have costs associated with the eventual closure of the stump dump, and have some monitoring costs that were not required this year, so we're bringing them forward to 2021. Some training, repairs and maintenance in various areas, First Street dock expenses, and the community hall condition assessment, which I believe is now underway, as mentioned yesterday. So that totals $77,100. In emergency planning, we have some emergency equipment expenses and planning expenses that were not completed, so we're bringing those forward as well. And in public spaces, we have parks and trails repairs and maintenance that wasn't fully required last year, so we're bringing those forward to pay for the repairs and maintenance costs in 2021. So the total reassignment at this point is $209,435. This amount right now is not it's not certain. It's estimated at this point. It will likely increase before the financial plan is adopted. We haven't completed our year end yet, so we will likely be bringing some more funds forward. In an effort to balance the budget, we've also allocated some of the 2020 surplus. So we saw this shift of funds where we were able to allocate for a few reasons. Actually, we saw higher revenues than anticipated in 2021, which created a surplus. And we also saw the availability of the COVID Restart Grant, where we were able to apply some of those funds in areas where we saw increased expenditures or reductions in revenues as a result of COVID, which freed up some other dollars, which or formed some of the surplus that we have more flexibility with and are able to use it in other ways. So we have allocated some of the surplus funds in the budget. I will be modifying these amounts before adoption of the financial plan, likely reducing the use of surplus slightly due to the addition of non-market change into the budget, as well as some modifications to some of the expenses based on information I'll receive after today's meeting and before adoption. So administration, we've brought forward the amounts for the service level review, and we've used some funds to balance the budget, a minimal amount to balance the budget, and that likely is going to come out with the addition of the non-market change revenue. Protective services, and I'll just highlight infrastructure and public works as well. We have 2 fleet additions. When we purchase new vehicles or new assets, we don't use capital and infrastructure dollars to do that because our current asset management plan does not plan for new addition of assets in the future. We are working towards that as we further develop the plan. So until we get to that point, we are utilizing other funds to pay for new addition of assets. So these 2 vehicles I'm recommending to come out of surplus dollars rather than obtaining debt debt servicing at this point. I don't think it's necessary to borrow at this point through Municipal Finance Authority. I'll chat a bit more about that in a moment. And I also don't think it's necessary to tax this year, as we do have these surplus funds available for that. Community Children's Center, there's an amount of $100,000 that we are applying there from surplus in order to assist with balancing our financial plan. We're able to do that this year. We don't do that every year, but it is a good use of funds, so we don't have to see an increase to the taxpayer in this year to balance the budget in other areas. On an annual basis, we do subsidize the Children's Center operations, and that has been in and around $100,000 per year through taxation. And so the total allocation of surplus at this point is close to $280,000. But like I said, I am going to make some changes to this, so I will report back on some of these areas again. I'd like to provide council with an update on what the debt servicing is looking like in the financial plan, more for the 2021 and the current year to come. We are seeing expiry of equipment financing through Municipal Finance Authority. Council will notice that over the years I've been reducing debt in this area, minimizing debt as much as possible in anticipation of some of our larger capital projects, the wastewater treatment plant, where we will have to take on more debt. So where this program still remains available to us. As we talked about yesterday, when a new fire truck will be required, we won't necessarily have all the funds required in the reserve fund to go out and purchase the fire truck outright. So we will still have access to this equipment financing program to be able to pay for half of the fire truck or a portion of the fire truck should we not have those reserve funds. The current term for this equipment financing expires on November 21st, and then that fire truck will be paid off. You notice the estimated payments on these two equipment financing on the top line is higher than the estimated balance, because the balance is principal only, doesn't include the interest that we'll have to pay. Similar to the next one, which expires for that larger piece of equipment we purchased with the backhoe. We did do equipment financing. It expires in 2022. And then we have our one long-term debt, the debenture debt for the water upgrades, which expires or matures in 2031. That $70,969 includes principal and interest, fixed payments each year, and the payments on an annual basis are $51,890. So now I'm going to go into discussion on property tax, and I will have a look at all 5 years of property taxation, and then I'll more closely look at 2021 because those are the years where we can estimate our tax rates at this stage. We don't do that for any of the future years. We do that on an annual basis. So this slide you'll see repeated later on in my presentation because I am going to provide some options to modify the capital and infrastructure levy as we have existing in our current financial plan. So if council recalls, we did, as a response to COVID and the unknown economic impact, we did reduce the capital and infrastructure levy in the 2020 to 2024 financial plan. When I presented in November, council had indicated that they would like me to come back with some options to see if what it would look like if we didn't reduce the levy or perhaps not use surplus dollars. And so I've done that, and I will come back to this slide again later on in my presentation before I provide those options. So included in the current financial plan is the capital and infrastructure levy investment plan that we adopted in the 2020 financial plan. So I haven't changed it for the purposes of the documentation, but I have provided options. So you'll notice in year 2021, we reduced the levy by $775,218, and by reduced, I mean we originally proposed to collect twice as much as what we are going to put in those reserves this year. We're also taking half of what we're going to contribute to reserve funds this year and using surplus funds of $387,609 for that. So that's what the red section is. In year 2022, we've reduced the levy by 25% as well as in 2023. But in 2022, we're going to do 50-50 split between surplus funds, which is the red amount, and then taxation is the blue amount. And then you'll see in the later years of the plan, we build that investment level up to that optimal level of investment that we are trying to reach, and as we work on our asset inventory and asset management plan. Originally, we intended on getting to that optimal investment level by 2023. This plan delays us a year, and it also restricts us from using some of those prior year surplus dollars for other purposes that we may require. So I will come back to the levy discussion a little bit later on, but I'll just move on to having a look at the 5-year property tax calculation. So this is a table I provide each year, and it's just a visual of to show the split of taxes for the various reasons why we may tax. So that blue amount is the base level of the general municipal base level of taxation that we typically see about a 2% increase per year to. And so that 2% is to keep up with the rising costs of fuel and hydro and other materials and supplies that we need to purchase to offer the services that we provide. Overall and on average, a 2% has seemed to work well for us. We have had to infuse other funds into the budget this year, and that is somewhat a result of not doing that base level 2% tax increase in 2020. The red sections are the capital and infrastructure levy. So you see that growing over the years, as I indicated in the previous slide. And then the green section is debt. And you do see that grow in year 2024 and 2025 as we take on the fixed principal and interest payments of the wastewater treatment plant. And that top amount, which is quite small, is the demand loan that we've guaranteed for the THC. We are required to tax for any guarantees that we have in place and we also are required to have an adopted debt servicing bylaw, which we also have in place in order to do that. Those funds are being set aside in a reserve fund. If that guarantee is not called, then we will have those funds available to pay for other debt servicing, such as the debt servicing I showed on a couple slides ago, or for the future wastewater treatment plant debt that we'll see coming online. So this is a look at the 2021 municipal property taxation calculation. The top line shows what that blue bar was in the previous slide, that base level of taxation in 2021. It includes a 2% general increase, which embedded in that 3.4 million is 67,934. The next line, which is not drafted in the financial plan yet, but will be once we receive the revised roll and prior to adoption of our tax rates, is the 2021 non-market change. So those are changes to assessment values that occur outside of the market changes. So new construction or changes in inventory or a subdivision of property, those types of things, the impact on assessment values as a result of those items. And that amounts to 56,823. So the base level of municipal taxation in 2021 is 3,521,448. We have the capital and infrastructure levy as proposed in the current financial plan, which I know is possibly subject to change, of 387,609. And then that demand loan that we have in the guarantee in place for the Tofino Housing Corporation is 70,756. And then the debt servicing costs for the reservoir of 51,890. So the total 2021 municipal taxes are 4,031,703. As mentioned, that is subject to change based on the changes to non-market change revenue up above, listed at 56,823. All other amounts, unless we make changes to the infrastructure levy, will remain the same. So these are the draft municipal tax rates for 2021. And I just want to emphasize these are municipal tax rates only. We don't have access to the other agency taxes at this stage in the financial planning process. Those do come out over the next couple of months. The only agency tax we do have confirmation of is the library tax. I don't have the number handy and in front of me right now, but it was included in the more detailed financial plan that's included in the agenda item on page 1. So these are municipal taxes only for the, in order to collect the $4 million mentioned on the previous page, these are the municipal taxes that we have prepared to collect that. So you'll notice that in most of the classes, the tax rate is going up slightly, and that is a result of adding back the capital and infrastructure levy over last year. Last year, in addition to not doing a base rate 2% tax increase, we also did not collect anything through taxation for the infrastructure levy. So what that resulted in was a 19% tax decrease in 2020. We need to slowly build up that infrastructure levy. So the increase to the tax rates and the taxes is going to look quite different over the next few years as we build up that capital and infrastructure levy amount. We'll take a look specifically at the tax rate for the infrastructure levy in a moment. I've just provided some extra information at the bottom of the slide just for the public information. This presentation will go up on our public consultation page after this presentation. So I have included some information on some of our slides that would help explain or be more descriptive with what information is included on here. This is a comparison of our assessments over last year's revised roll. So I'm using the completed assessment roll received for 2021 and comparing it against the 2020 revised assessment roll, which we will receive towards the end of March. So assessment values have gone up. 65,424,877 overall. So an overall 5% increase. I'll mention that non-market change it's included in this difference. And so I'll parse that out in a moment, but I just want to highlight that it is. You'll see that there was a significant reduction to the business class, and that's what I'll be talking about a little bit as we go through tax rate calculations in a moment. We don't typically see this. If we do see a negative or a reduction in the business class, it typically relates to non-market change, where we see a shift from the business class to residential, or a subdivision of a property, or rezoning or something like that, where we may see some negative or difference in there. But typically, once you net out non-market change, we're in a positive position in the business class. So I'd like to focus on that a little bit more in my presentation when I go through taxes. The residential class, we're seeing a significant increase of 75,774,200. Embedded in that is a bit of non-market change, but we saw a significant inventory increase in 2020, and that's why the valuations have gone up so much. So when I say inventory change, for those that don't know what that means, it means new construction on a property, or a stratified property that was once one parcel and have become multiple units in the following year. You'll see a big increase in the residential class as a result of that. So non-market change is looking like this. So these numbers should be netted against the numbers, the difference on the previous slide. So I'll just kind of flip back and forth here for a moment. $10 million in assessment values in the residential class relates to non-market changes, so changes outside of that market change, the changes to prices or assessment values as a result of new home sales and that type of thing. So if we go back to this slide, that 75 million, of that 75 million, 10 is market change, so 65 million has changed as a result of the market. And I'll just jump down to the business class. $4 million is a result of non-market changes. So when you net that against the difference in assessment values in the previous slide here, The changes related to market are actually $16 million, which is quite significant for this class. And then we see a $2 million difference in the recreation class. The majority of that is related to non-market changes. So we did see some shifts of properties go from the business class into recreation, and that's largely dependent on use. I don't have information handy today on the specific properties or the details of those properties, but if council is interested, they can reach out to me after today's meeting. So total for non-market change differences is 15,804,000. And so essentially that 65 million that we're seeing in a difference in assessment value, 50,000 is related to market changes. The balance is related to non-market changes. So I like to show council before I get into tax rates and doing some sample calculations on sample properties, where the tax is being collected and how that relates back to overall assessment values within the class. You'll see that the majority of our assessment values and the majority of our tax folios are sitting within the residential class. So we have 1,222 tax occurrences in the residential class, and that makes up just over $1 billion of assessment values. The residential class is paying $2.1 million of that overall $4 million municipal tax revenue that we have to collect. I don't focus too much on the utilities or the light industry. There's very few properties within that class. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Then in the business class, we have 279 occurrences, and that relates to $243 million in assessment value, so significantly less than the residential class. The business class is collecting $1.7 million of municipal taxes. The recreation and nonprofit class is collecting 80,000. So all of these amounts here and the taxes based on the assessment values and the apportions are collected as shown on the table here. And I'm going to just show what a visual looks like. This is something I provide each year, and I do have some previous numbers, the numbers for the last couple years available here in my notes. So 44% is going to be collected from the business class and 53% is going to be collected from the residential class. That's very similar to last year. The residential class paid 44% of overall taxation. 54 came from commercial. So we are seeing a bit of a shift over to that recreation and nonprofit class. So I will go into sample tax calculations now, but I would like to just stop for a moment because that was a lot of information and see if there's any questions at this point.
Any questions for Nyla? Councillor Steer?
Thank you, Nyla. At what point will you be talking about the options around the C&I levy? Is that going to be coming up?
Yes, I'm going to do some calculations on some sample properties first, and then from there I'll move into the infrastructure levy discussion and modify those tax rates to show you what the change is.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Anderson.
I'm trying to understand the decrease of assessment in the business or commercial class. It seems to me that it should actually be going up because businesses have expanded in some cases and improvements have been made that we've seen. Is that because businesses are struggling and they're devalued a bit? Because it seems to me that we haven't, there's been a couple of empty businesses or businesses that are closed, but I'm just wondering why it dropped significantly.
Through the chair to Councillor Anderson, from what I can tell, and I've had about a month with at the most with the completed assessment role, so haven't had a great deal of time to look at it and look forward to seeing the revised role in case there were any changes based on appeals or just further review of the assessment role. But from what I can see and from what I know about valuations of properties is that commercial properties do have the ability to submit revenue numbers if either requested from BC Assessment or if they go through an appeal process, which a lot of these properties did not go through an appeal process last year, but we saw a significant reduction in some of our higher valued properties, which I do have examples of that. We either saw commercial properties remain the same or we saw them reduce as much as 13%.
That sort of draws another question about if we anticipate a lot of appeals from businesses. We've seen it in the past that businesses have appealed their assessment, and I hope we don't have a flood of that this year because of the COVID situation. So, and if we anticipate that, I don't know if we can have some contingencies for it or not.
So what we do have available to us is our financial stability reserve, which is in place for us if we see a risk to our revenues from unanticipated events. One of them being the pandemic, another one being any risk to our assessment role, because as council is aware, we can see some changes throughout the year after we set our tax rates. And if that negatively impacts our revenue, then we can access those reserve funds to continue to provide the services that we've committed to providing. I haven't received any notification from BC Assessment about whether there are significantly more appeals this year. Usually when there's an anomaly like that or a high volume of something going on at BC Assessment, we usually get notification. I haven't, and so I don't know if that means there aren't, or I think we'll have more information after the revised role comes out.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, see none, move on.
Okay, so I like to be consistent from year to year and use the same properties to show what the change in assessment looks like, and then council can get used to seeing the same properties and tax amounts for them. So I pick a sample property at the Fred Tibbs building. I pick a sample property, residential home on Neil Street, and then I'll go on from there. So in the Tibbs building, we saw significant increases to assessment values. I believe it was 2019. It could have been 2018. We saw some sales and market changes in that building that caused several of the units to increase in assessment value. So they've increased further about 10% over last year. If we carry out the proposed tax rates, as I showed a few moments ago, last year's municipal taxes on this property were $809. This year they will be $901. So there would be an increase on their municipal tax portion of $92. Important to keep in mind, though, or just remind council that we had no capital and infrastructure levy last year. So a lot of what we're going to see in changes to the tax bill is going to be related to the infrastructure levy. On Neil Street, the property that we're having a look at increased in assessment value 5%. The municipal taxes last year were $1,245. They'd be going up to $1,323. So that's an increase of $78. Residential home in Uwood went from 957,000 up to 996,000, so an increase of 4%. We're seeing a municipal tax increase of 5% at $99. Property on Lynn Road increased in assessment value 2%. We're seeing municipal taxes increase 3% at $194. So this is where we saw decreases. So we have a couple large resorts in the community. We follow these assessment values from year to year. Both of these properties have decreased in assessment value, one by 12%, the other by 13%. Even though there is a reduction in assessment value, because these are such higher valued property, the proportion of taxes are still quite high on this property, given the value of it compared to others. So we are still seeing an increase of property taxes, and municipal tax increase on the first property of 1%, and then down below of 0.2%, but minimal tax increases here due to the reduction of assessment value. This is a sample of 2 business properties, both restaurants, where the assessment value remained the same over last year. So this is extremely rare to see these properties. I believe council will remember, because we do follow the same properties from year to year, we always see increases in market value within these 4 properties. And this year it's either going down or it's remaining the same. So we're seeing a municipal tax increase for those properties that remain the same, of 15% here. So on the top, we're seeing, or at top and bottom, we're seeing a 15% increase to municipal taxes. And I'm just going to take a minute here. So I am actually going to go back a little bit, because now that we've had a look at these sample tax comparisons, forgive me, I hope this doesn't make anyone dizzy. I just want to go back to this slide where it shows the way taxes are apportioned by property class. This is a similar percentage than we saw last year, but we are seeing a reduction in the business class. So each year we do talk about tax shifting, and just to remind everyone what tax shifting is, I'm just going to go back to our tax rate slide, is once we determine the amount of revenue we need, we work backwards and we calculate our municipal tax rates based on the assessment values that are provided to us by BC Assessment. There's a lot that goes into establishing that tax rate. It depends on the value of revenues. It depends on the determination of assessment values and how those assessment values have changed from year to year within a property class and between property classes. So we are seeing quite a bit of a shift this year in that residential properties have increased quite a bit. In terms of market increases. There have been higher than anticipated market sales in the residential class, and within the business class, we're seeing a significant reduction that we haven't seen. If you look at the tax rate last year versus this year in the residential class, you'll see that it is remaining quite flat, and with the sample calculations I went over, we're not seeing significant increases in municipal taxes in the residential class. So I just wanted to highlight that in case there was concern about what that shift of burden might be doing to the residential class. So I'm not seeing a significant change in the tax rate. I'm also not seeing a significant change in that municipal tax payment as a result of the business class assessments going down. If you go down to the business class, we can have a look at the tax rate. And last year, the tax rate was 6.29. This year, it's gone up to 7.26. So we're seeing a greater increase in that tax rate in the business class, but it is being applied against lower assessment values. And so the increase in municipal taxation is at a lower percentage in that business class than we're seeing in the residential class. And so I'd like to highlight that as a way to bring up tax shifting, because it is brought up at the council table as we go through the financial planning process, and just, I guess, go back to conversations in previous years where I haven't been able to find an example of why within our assessment values and our tax rates and our apportion of taxes based on how we currently have them, to strongly recommend a tax shift from council where we would move some of the burden of taxes once the rates have been determined as they are here from one property class to another property class. However, seeing the reduction in assessment values that we have this year in the business class, that could be a reason why council may want to look at how the property taxes are apportioned among the property classes. Tax shifting is something that is set out in tax policy, and a council may set that as an objective or a way to make decisions on establishing tax rates. We certainly have that ability because we do establish that as a tax policy in our bylaws and have it available to council to discuss on an annual basis. So I guess to summarize what I just said, I'm not coming forward with a recommendation to shift taxes from the residential class to the business class. My position on this matter is to very much discuss the facts that may impact council's decision with respect to tax shifting, and highlight why council may or may not want to consider it. So I am seeing consistency with the tax rates in the residential class. I'm seeing modest increases in municipal taxes on the residential tax bill, but I am also seeing this reduction in assessment values in the business class. So I am going to pause there to see if we do want to have a discussion right now on tax shifting, or if that's not of interest to council, in which case I can move on.
Who wants to go first? Councillor Steer.
Sure. For me, the understanding of tax shifting and the implications is fairly complex. And I think, Nyla, thank you for giving us your advice or recommendation regarding that. I know it has been a discussion in the past, and I'm based on your recommendations or advice, I'm comfortable with that, and not needing to discuss a shift at this point in time.
Anyone else? Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I'm not interested in a shift. I'm a little curious. The restaurant example, it seemed like a 15% increase over 2020 to 21 seemed high, but I'm just wondering how much of a decrease they got in 2020 from 2019. So does the 2021 increase sort of bring them back to 2019 taxation levels, or is it still below those levels? So
Yes, that's it. It's through the chair to Councillor Anderson. Yes, it's definitely below 2019 levels. We are working our way back up to tax, to increase the taxation with the infrastructure levy. So those tax rates are definitely lower than what they saw the tax rates in 2019. So bringing the infrastructure levy back in is going to look like a tax increase, but it's not. We reduced taxes last year, and so we need to bring that investment levels back up, which was very clear, I feel, to the community and to council when we made that change.
and then just another question about the business class. I noticed you used restaurants, but I'm just wondering about other types of businesses. Would they be affected in the same way? The retail, the gas stations, the various types of business in the class. Would that be about the same as a restaurant?
No, it's I don't see consistency across all of the properties. I didn't look at it by sector, but I did see some increases to assessment values. I just saw significant decreases to some of the very high valued properties within that class.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chalmers.
No, I agree with Councillor Anderson and Councillor Steer.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I generally want to move things more onto business, but I don't think it's fair just to lump all businesses in the same group. So I'm happy as it is at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so I will then move on from property taxation a little bit and talk about the infrastructure levy, which is somewhat related. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and share something else now. 1 second. At yesterday's meeting, we talked about Mackenzie Beach Road, the paving of Mackenzie Beach Road, and what that would mean for our reserve funds. And where we landed with that discussion yesterday is to consider deferring the project because we were concerned that the reserve funds would not be adequate for all the priorities that are yet to be determined, which is something we're working on over the next year. So to allow us some time to do that, we have this spreadsheet includes Mackenzie Beach Road, but let me pause on that thought I started. I wanted to provide to council today a very quick spreadsheet. I do apologize for all the numbers. We did this between the end of yesterday's meeting and the start of today's meeting to project the balances of the reserve funds for the capital and infrastructure levy. And I'll just highlight column B here and explain why I did that. The discussion about Mackenzie Beach Road landed us where we felt as though we'd be depleting our reserve funds. And so I wanted to come back to council with showing you what those reserve fund balances will look like at the end of this year, of this financial plan that we're proposing, and where we're kind of at to date. So at the end of December of 2020, the balance in that reserve fund, which is for all the roads we have and the sidewalks that we have. So maybe I'll just pause for a moment and say that when we collect the infrastructure levy, it's for all the assets that we have in these categories here: roads and sidewalks, all the way to parks and recreation infrastructure. We collect those funds and we allocate them based on the proportion of assets that we have in these various categories. So in roads and sidewalks, it's for all of our roads and all of our sidewalks. If we use the reserve fund to fund one project that is quite a bit more quite expensive, we may not have money to take care of our other priorities in the near future should they come up. So at the end of December of 2020, we have close to $1 million in that reserve fund. Based on how the capital and infrastructure levy is proposed for this year, we will contribute these amounts here into these reserve fund categories. So it's not a lot. We're not proposing to contribute a lot to the infrastructure levy this year, but we're going to take a look at that in a moment to see if we want to change that. We are proposing to allocate these amounts in the 2021 budget, and these are all for projects that have been presented to council yesterday and today. So we've projected the balance here for 2021 in the roads reserve. If we were to carry out all those projects, the balance would be at just over $300,000. Then we would have contributions over the next 5 years, which slowly build up as we've proposed in the previous slides. And then we would get to the end of the 5-year plan with $1.6 million. So the concern that staff and I believe council shared yesterday is that we would get to the end of 2021 and we would have a very low reserve fund to make sure that all of our other asset priorities in this category would be well taken care of. And so that's where that concern is. So I just wanted to provide this as a demonstration or a tool to continue to have those conversations. So I won't go through this column by column, but I certainly wanted to provide this to council, and we'll circulate this so that this can be used in council's decision making and staff's decision making to determine whether the priority of the capital project fits in well with the planning that we've proposed over the next 5 years. This is certainly something we look at on a staff level, but wanted to highlight it as part of this discussion. So I'm going to leave it at that for fear that I may go through every number in that spreadsheet. That would be boring. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'll just carry on with the levy discussion here.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I think last year's budget, we sort of planned on the worst effect from the effect of COVID, and so we did some fairly drastic cuts. As it turned out, Tofino fared better than many municipalities in terms of just continuing on with a fairly strong economy. We're still not completely sure what will happen this year, but I'm a little more confident that that we can get back on track fairly quickly. And having seen just sort of what we saw come in water revenue and so on, when we had anticipated much greater loss of those revenues, that sort of indicates to me that I think we can come back a little stronger in replacing some of that money that we did forego that in last year's budget for the CNI levy. So sort of my initial thoughts on it. Thanks.
Anyone else? Seeing none, carry on, Nyla.
Okay, so I'm bringing back this slide that we talked about a moment ago just to remind us all where the financial plan is sitting right now, with a 50% reduction in 2021 and 25% reduction to the levy in 2022 and 2023, and contributions from general surplus. So I certainly don't mean to provide options to assume that there was no economic impact as a result of COVID to our community, to our business owners, to our residents. I look at our financials only, and I certainly cannot advise council on what the ability to pay will be this year. I did last year predict a reduction in the taxpayers and users' ability to pay, and that's why we put the measures in place that we did. Based on the metrics that I have to see how the year went, and only looking at that, I can see that property taxes were paid more than expected. We had very low taxes in arrears, which means current year's taxes remain unpaid and go into the following year as unpaid. We had extremely low values in that regard. And we did collect more in user fees and charges and saw an increase to development last year. From a municipality's perspective and how we were advised by the province, we were told and advised to stay the course, and we certainly chose not to do that. We chose to reduce taxes, and the result of that was reductions to certain service levels and fairly important services to the community. We reduced service levels in childcare, recreation, and in bylaw enforcement. And we heard very clearly from the community that that just simply was not acceptable. And so we need to make sure that we're delivering in all of our service areas this year. It's why I could not come forward with less than a 2% tax increase. We need to make sure that we are keeping up with those rising costs and making sure that we are budgeting as though it is a year where we are going to offer all those services as we historically have. So that is very much the budget that we have prepared for council. In the area of the capital and infrastructure levy, I did advise council last year, and I still feel this way, that it is a long-term investment plan. We do have a lot of priorities, and we started investing late. We started investing when we have infrastructure in the ground that is past its service life, that is very closely reaching the end of its service life, and we're going to see high costs to renewal of assets at some point in the future, and we need to be ready to meet those costs. And that's something I never keep a secret, and I talk about year after year throughout this process. So it's really important to me that we keep contributing to these reserve funds so that we're ready to renew our assets where and when we need to. There won't always be grant opportunities available for every single asset category, and we've certainly worked that risk into our investment model. I don't want to take too long to get to that optimal level of investment. We've been saving for infrastructure by the time we get to year 2024 for, close to 14 or 15 years. So while we work on our asset management practices and this investment model, we need to make sure that we are meeting our objectives in that regard. So this current investment model over the next 5 years has some weaknesses embedded in it, even though it's something that is workable and we certainly can do. And perhaps it's not weaknesses, maybe it's just pros and cons to each of the years that we're proposing here. If we infuse surplus dollars into supporting the infrastructure levy to minimize the tax impact, we don't have the flexibility with those surplus funds. We have talked about what our objectives are with respect to surplus dollars, and some of the comments have been, we know that we have large debt servicing amounts coming in the future. Could those amounts be moved to reserve funds on an annual basis when we have surplus dollars, and that would minimize the impact to the taxpayer for debt servicing. We've also talked about could surplus dollars on an annual basis go towards reducing the infrastructure levy in the following year and then just taxing the difference. All of those options are just fine and certainly possible. Where I want to be sure about is where we're reducing these amounts by 50%, 25%, and 25%, and make sure we're comfortable with that going forward. Or if we do want to stay the course and we do want to invest as we originally planned, are we willing to go back up to that original level of where we intended on investing? And so that's what the options look like that I'm providing to council today. So the first option would be keeping that total levy amount the same for all years as in the current financial plan. So as in here, keep the actual investment level the same with the reductions in it, but remove the contribution from general surplus. And so what that would do is we would still be investing the same amount into our reserve funds, but we'd be able to use those general surplus amounts for something else. Option number 2 is bring the levy up to the pre-COVID investment levels and then keep the general surplus reserve contributions in. So what that would mean is those green areas, we would tax for those amounts in those years. We'd keep the surplus amounts in there. Option 3 is to increase the levy to pre-COVID investment levels and remove general surplus altogether. So go back to where we originally planned to be and remove those red sections and those green sections and just go back up to taxing as we originally had planned. So let's have a look at what that would look like. And there's lots of numbers on this screen. I apologize. So let's just focus on the top table for now. So the first column are the property classes. The second column is the draft CNI levy mill rates, tax rates. So the municipal tax rate that I showed earlier on in the presentation includes this amount. So I've pulled out what the tax rate is for the capital and infrastructure levy. And what I'll be showing here is what the impact is to municipal taxes if we were to do option 1, 2, or 3. So essentially option 1 is charging 2 times the amount. Option 2 is charging 3 times the amount. And option 4 is charging 4 times the amount. So I've provided down below in the table a comparison of what the levy looked like in dollar amounts in 2019. And I provided that because that was a year where we were just having regular operations. In 2020, we didn't tax at all for the levy, so I don't have a tax rate to compare that to last year. So if we look at the residential section in the table on the bottom for a moment, we have a residential property at $395,000. In 2021, we're proposing they pay $78 for the levy. In 2019, this property paid $298. And then from there, you can see what the different options would result in for the infrastructure levy, which is included in that municipal amount that we looked at a moment ago. So if we went to option 3 and you compare that to the 2019 levy, we're increasing at a rate as we originally intended, which is about 5 or 6% per year, depending on the property and the assessment value. So with option 3, we'd be more in line with where we originally planned. With option 2, we'd be somewhere in the middle between where we wanted to be, or where we originally planned to be, and where we were for 2019. And then in option 1, we would see an increase to the levy of 2 times what we have drafted in the current financial plan, but still lower than where we were sitting for 2019. So that kind of completes my discussion here, but maybe I'll summarize it before I see if there are any questions. I don't have, again, a recommendation here. I think that that the flexibility with general surplus funds is very much a council decision. In the absence of a policy, which I do hope to bring forward to council within the next year, we have to have a look at where the funds are required and what some of council objectives and perhaps strategic priorities are. Do we want the funds going into here, or do we want to pull them out? Do we want to tax where we originally planned so we can get to our investment levels so that we can ensure that we have the funds to renew our assets? We have to sort of balance all of those objectives and concerns that we have and come up with a reasonable solution and an option for charging the levy over the next 5 years. Or if we just want to make a decision about 2021, we can certainly do that as well. I am hoping for some direction today from council so I can work on finalizing the tax rates after today's meeting and once the financial plan numbers, and once we receive the revised roll, we'll be closer to finalizing all of that. So I'll stop sharing for now. I can certainly bring up the slides again if we need to see the numbers throughout the discussion, but I'll just take a moment here.
Thanks, Nyla. That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Who wants to start? Councillor Chalmers.
Sure, I'll do it. That is a lot to take in. I agree with you, Nyla, that I think we heard very loud and clear from the community that we cut taxes too much. And never thought I'd say that. But yeah, I think I'm comfortable with option number 2. I think that we do. I think this year is looking a lot more like what last year turned out to be, and we were very, very conservative last year, and that we do need to catch up from that, and that we did hear that things need to change. So, but I feel like option 3 might be a bit of a hard pill to swallow. So that's my comfort level with this. All this information all at once, very short. So I'd like to hear what everybody else says.
Next, Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because we don't have a crystal ball, of course. But I'm sort of between option 1 or 2 and keeping that surplus in. It was difficult. I think quite a difficult decision for many of us on council last year to remove so much of the CNI levy, knowing how hard it was to get there, get it to those levels. So yeah, the sooner we can get back to our target funding for that, the better. We're simply putting off paying that. It's going to have to come to that, back to that level sooner or later. So yeah, I think the community is in a position to sort of bounce back a little quicker than the original draft. So there's my thoughts. I'm anxious to hear what Councillor McMaster thinks, because
I'll ask Councillor Steer first.
Well, Councillor Anderson doesn't care what I have to say. I'm just kidding. No, I recognize that last year was an anomaly, and that Nyla, we had charted a course based on not having a crystal ball. I do want to point out, though, that as much as we probably as a community didn't suffer as much as others, we still did suffer, and many of the businesses did see significant reductions in their incomes based on many factors. So it wasn't all cut and dry, as I think many people somehow are alluding that everyone did extremely well. There was a lot of issues for many of the businesses, so and residents included. So I do want to be cognizant of that, and in terms of the strategy that was charted out and the reductions in that levy and using that surplus, you know, I'm still reluctant, even though I'm probably the strongest proponent of that CNI levy and meeting those targets. You did point out very clearly, though, Nyla, that this is a long-term strategy, and that you had built into many of your calculations with that in mind, that moving forward we would be looking at that long-term picture. And I do appreciate that and recognize that it was a well-charted course that you had brought forward. So I'm finding myself in this weirdly stage where I do need to digest more of the options that you brought forward before I could make a really fulsome decision on this. My gut is telling me to hold the course of what we started, just because I think it was well thought out and that it is a long-term strategy. And I don't know, once again, about the crystal ball and being able to project forward about what those revenues might look like for the community in general, from a business and sense. And so I would need, I'm conflicted, obviously, but I do feel that the course that we had charted, I'm still comfortable with. I do think using that general surplus fund, which we don't have a policy yet, that it was a good use of that fund in terms of mitigating the problems, understanding that the taxation separate for the services that we're talking about, like bylaw and what have you, we recognize that we have to bring those service levels up. But the CNI, in my opinion, was slightly different. We weren't cutting services by the reduction of that CNI levy. It was so that's where I think I would need more clarification on, but if Nyla, you might be able to answer that. But so the long and short of it is holding steady until I had a little more time to digest on the three options before I can make a full decision on this.
Councillor Chalmers, you want to say something?
Yeah, and I might be wrong here, but I feel like I'd like to. We just chose to defer a project because we were concerned about how low the levies were. Starting to juggle my words. So I would say that we have to cut services as a result of this, and we had quite a lengthy conversation about our concerns about how low those levies were in the reserves. So I would stick again strongly with. I think that we do get back to that original point. And I agree with you, Councillor Steer, that not everybody did well, but I don't think it was quite what we were expecting when we made those decisions last year quite quickly, quite out of the unknown and the fear. It was the early days of the pandemic and a lot of change, a lot was happening really quickly. I think we've had a lot of time to kind of understand it a little bit better and see where we're going. And so I'll support again a bit of a raise.
Well, I guess, surprise, surprise, I was in favour of option 3 off the top of my head. I'd like to get back on the target as soon as possible. And I think the fact that there weren't many delinquent taxpayers shows to me that it wasn't too bad. And I think the sooner we get back on track, the sooner we can carry on doing the big projects that are coming down the pipe. So I would put, at the moment I'd go for option 3, and I may be coerced to go into option 2, but no lower than that.
Does that mean we have one vote for each option?
I'd like to have Councillor Steer clarify what he means by staying the course. Do you mean staying on track with the original plan, which would kind of say to me that's option 3? Or do you mean staying on course with the draft?
Like I said, I need a bit more time to digest, and I fully hear Councillor McMaster and Councillor Chalmers the reasons why you would like to move forward, and I'm the strongest proponent of getting back to those levels by far. Like I said, I need a bit more time to digest those. If I were to be convinced about moving in a direction, it would be probably not to the level 3 as Councillor McMaster would support. I would be somewhere moving closer to the 1 or the 2. If Nyla needed a direction from the majority of council, I'm sorry at this point, but if I were to be moved in the arguments that are being brought forward, moving towards an option 1 or 2 would suffice without having a full understanding of what the implications are at this point.
I suppose I'm going to ask people, what can Nyla do to sway people's decision one way or the other?
Yeah, that was, to be honest, I wanted a little actually direction from Nyla.
Oh, you did.
To help push us along a bit here. As the complexity of municipal finances are, and the expectations of some of us to be able to fully comprehend what those implications are is a big ask. And that having a little bit of I know that you gave us the information, but maybe a little bit of direction, or your gut feeling maybe might be helpful in sort of that swaying, certainly for myself.
Okay, to Councillor McMaster, to everybody. I I think that council knows my style well by now, and that I don't like to come forward with very strong recommendations. I do appreciate the discussion and things that may come up that I haven't thought about. I think we've all been working together long enough now to know that I feel very strongly with about this investment in our infrastructure, and it's something I talk about quite boldly year to year, and haven't been the favorite person of many in the community during some consultation sessions because of it, and that's okay, because I so strongly believe that we are starting to invest too late, and we do need to get to a place where we need to be, where we feel confident that when it comes time to renew a major piece of infrastructure, we'll at least have some funds to support a grant opportunity, or to borrow funds and supplement that. I want to be ready for that, and I don't want to put us in a situation where we won't be. However, having said that, by the time we get to year 2024, it doesn't mean we're going to have all of the money in place to be in that position in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. We're still going to find ourselves in situations, because our investments are not where they need to be, where we're not going to have the money to replace that infrastructure. But we can get closer to that if we commit to an investment plan. If council recalls, when I first brought this investment plan forward in 2017, I wanted to be far more aggressive than council was willing to be, and at that time I was quite bold in saying, let's just invest this amount and move forward. We know we need to get there. And, I've taken a softer approach with it, and an approach where I still feel comfortable with. And I did come forward last year and said that this is a long-term financial investment model. It's not something where it's going to be fixed overnight, and it's not something where we're going to be exactly where we need to be once we reach that optimal level of investment. So this plan that we have in place right now is not going to set us back too far, because our reserves are already too low. They're not where they need to be, and we need to get closer to that. So it slows us down a little bit, but if you look at the grand scheme of things over a 20-year planning period, it does not set us back that far, because we're talking about, a couple $1 million, where by year 2024, that's what we want to be collecting. So that was my point last year, is that we need to look at this more broadly. And if there's something we can do for the community during this time, then we should try and do it. And I picked that area where we could have a look at and make some compromise there, because it is such a long-term investment model. So strong recommendation. I mean, I do want to see us move forward with option 3. This is not, the municipal tax bill is not the only expense in people's homes. It's not the only expense in businesses. It's an aspect of a business, and in some businesses, it's quite a small expenditure, the municipal tax bill. We are here for the community to provide a service, many services, and in this instance, we're meant to ensure that we have a strong fiscal future. And so my recommendations are strongly based on ensuring that this community does have a strong fiscal future. And so I put my recommendation behind option 3, but I am very considerate of how this year has started for the community, for the residents and for the businesses. It's been a really slow start to the year economically, and that's not where we started last year when we were going through this process. It kind of hit us partway through the year, and the future is still somewhat uncertain. So I would very much be comfortable with modifying the levy to option 1 or option 2, but I would like council to consider moving away from the current model and consider taxing a little bit more in this regard, because as you saw in the options, we're pretty far away from where we taxed in 2019 for the infrastructure levy. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it did help, for sure. It moved me away from one of my earlier thoughts, and put me closer to moving in the other direction for sure. And I appreciate it, that very much. And I've always been 100% supportive, even before I was on council, of the direction that you had charted in terms of an investment plan, moving forward, thinking into the future, and the fact that we had neglected the most important thing is providing that infrastructure that the community depends on. So I've always been 100% supportive. I'm also, these often, as we are well aware of, these are often political decisions that have to be taken, and in some circumstances, as of last year, I think they were the appropriate ones. And so your discussion right now has shifted me over a little more to a more fulsome understanding of the position that the district is in, and I would move more towards a comfortable compromise of an option 1 or 2 for sure. Duncan's Councillor McMaster is laughing. Thankfully he's muted right now.
I'm not sure whether that was a compromise. Any other thoughts from anybody? When do you need a decision, Nyla? Apart from tomorrow.
Yeah. We don't need to make a decision tonight. I am going to go through towards the end of my presentation a proposed timeline for adoption of the financial plan. And it is earlier than we normally do, because I've committed to council to going as quickly as we can through this process so we can get started on our work plans. So we are proposing to come back to council at a special meeting, I'm skipping ahead here a little bit, to on March 1st to come back and talk about whether we have authorization to move forward with preparing that financial plan bylaw, as well as coming back to council on some of the things we heard from residents on the consultation piece. So at that meeting, I could get some final clarity on where we'd like to go with the infrastructure levy. Alternatively, I could come back to the February 23rd meeting and add an opportunity on there for another verbal presentation on the levy and some more discussion on it, and hopefully a decision at that time.
I would prefer coming back on February 23. Even though I prefer option 3, I'd still like to think about it a little bit more. And I think we need to move on this. So I'd rather come back on February 23 rather than wait till March 1. Thoughts from anybody else? Councillor Chalmers, did you have your hand up?
I was agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. I didn't see the thumb, I just saw the elbow. Councillor Steer?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor McMaster, I agree. And Nyla, would it be possible for just the one slide that have the options available with the 2 parts on there to have that forwarded, just to have the numbers in front of me?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I agree. The 23rd is better time. I guess I'm leaning strongly towards option 2 at this point. I guess I had one more question around those options. Just the way that the assessment classes are breaking down, does that mean that in this taxation year, the residential section might bear more of a burden of that, of any of the implications of any of those options with the assessments down in the commercial class?
Through Councillor McMaster, Councillor Anderson, the impact that we're seeing based on assessment values was shown in those slides on those sample tax calculations, and so we're not seeing a significant burden shift to the residential class because we are seeing reductions in the business class. No, so I don't, just by moving the options, everyone will kind of move equally.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I will leave it to you
Sure.
till February 23rd, was it?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
That works.
Okay.
Yes, and I think that that leads us really well into our next discussion, which I probably should have brought up as part of the levy decision, and that relates to our utility rate review. Users will be seeing an increase to utility rates this year, which may or may not impact council's decision with respect to the levy. So I will move on to that discussion now. So the current rates that we have in place were adopted in 2015, and at that time there was a significant review of their utility rates, the structure, and our revenue requirements. So this rate review that we've done over the last year is the first review since that time. As council recalls, I did want to do a rate increase in 2020, but we made a decision to freeze utility rates as an economic measure, given the impacts of the pandemic. So the current rates that we have in place are not going to meet our 2021 revenue requirements. And that relates back to what the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works discussed earlier on in its presentation today with respect to the utilities and the operating requirements there. So we're doing a two-stage approach to the rate review. We had a look at our revenue requirements this year. Over the next year, we're going to have a look at the rate structure and some of the more specifics. And I'll go over the two stages in a second here. So we are proposing a rate change effective April 1st, 2021, which is the beginning of our Q2 billing cycle. So the focus of 2021, as I just mentioned, is to ensure we're meeting revenue requirements. We're not making any changes to the rate classes at this time. We've reviewed our current payment proportions, fixed fees, and connection fees. I did provide council or the committee of the whole with a thorough presentation on the statistics of that revenue collection and proportion within the rate classes that we currently have. And what we notice there is that the demand for consumption is matching up with where we are collecting the revenue, and which is certainly why I feel comfortable at this stage having a two-stage approach. If it ended up being that there was more of a burden on one of the rate classes versus the other and the consumption wasn't lining up, I'd probably be making some, or we would be making some recommendations on rate classes as well, but we're going to stick with the ones that we have for now. We are in discussions with Tla-o-qui-aht regarding an ecosystem service fee. We're unsure whether that will form part of the stage 1 or the stage 2 review and when that fee would be implemented. In 2022, the review will focus on the rate structure, including the rate classes. We will review the consumption levels, have a look at demand analysis, and then we will be working on or starting to redevelop those sewer utility charges. As council is aware, the utility charges are 90% of the sewer charges are 90% of the water charges. So this is a table that shows what our current rates are in the water utility and what our current rates are in the sewer utility for fixed and variable fees. And it's showing where we would propose our fees to be with the 13% increase on April 1st of 2021. Good. Okay, so we are originally we had expected that we'd have to figure out what the requirements would be for that first quarter of 2021, but we're able to between the last committee of the whole meeting and today's meeting, I was able to calculate what that loss would be not having that increase begin on January 1st. So I am proposing that it stays with a 13% increase as of April 1st, and then that difference we don't collect in Q1 is going to be transferred from prior year's surplus to make up that difference. So we just start on April 1st. So those are our proposed rates in these two classes. And then we have our fire flow class as well, which we're recommending remains the same with a 13% increase. So having a look at the rates doesn't mean a whole lot unless we know what the impact is to the users of the system. 13 percentage points always sound like a lot, dollar amounts always sound like a lot. So I just want to move away from that and have a look at the actual bills and what the impact would be. So again, a lot of numbers here. What I have is I've provided 2 sample properties in the residential class and 2 sample properties in the commercial class. I've provided annual consumptions for those properties. So the first one is a single family residential home, no vacation rental, potentially a suite, and we estimate those properties at 200 cubic meters per year. The current charge would mean that this property is paying $292 a year for water. Under the proposed new charge, it would go up to $330, which is a $38 annual increase or 10 cents per day. For the residential property with a vacation rental, the consumption is 500 cubic meters estimated at. Of course, they vary depending on the size, but I've just chosen one. The current charge is $816. The proposed charge is $922. So that's a $106 increase on an annual basis or 29 cents per day. So we are seeing the ability with the rate structure that we do have that when you consume more in the residential class, then you will be paying more because that variable rate that we saw on the previous slide goes up if a property consumes more than 60 cubic meters. So on the 2015 rate review, we wanted to find a way to capture properties that were high consumers in the residential class that were likely vacation rental properties potentially, or higher consumers of the system for whatever reason. And that would mean that those higher consumption amounts would be paying a higher rate per cubic meter. And that would be similar in this new rate structure, or with the new rates, because the structure, would remain the same. So for the commercial properties, we have a resort where the annual consumption would be just over 4,000 cubic meters. The current charge is $6,838 per year. The proposed 13% increase would mean $7,717. That's $879 a year or $2.41 per day. So where there is a high consumer in that commercial class or in the system, they are paying more under the rate increase. They pay more generally as well. For a restaurant, approximately 1,600 cubic meters per year. Current charge is $2,740. It would go up to just over $3,000. That's a $353 increase in the year or 97 cents per day. Similarly, in the sewer utility, that's going to be 90% of the rates. So we're seeing 90% of the rates on an annual basis and per day, as I just went over. So I won't go over this line by line, but I'll just go to this is a total of the water and the sewer charges. So for a single family residential home, you're going to see about, if you are consuming the average of 50 cubic meters per quarter, about 20 cents per day or $73 a year. Home with a vacation rental, about $200 per year. And for a commercial or resort, about $1,670 per year. And for a restaurant, about $670 per year. And that's for water and sewer charges with this proposed rate increase. So the rate increase does include a proposed increase of 4% on January 1st of next year to make sure that we do continue to stay in line with the increasing cost of the system and don't find ourselves in a situation where we have either deferred maintenance or not carried out the repairs due to lack of funds, which I guess is the same thing. So my recommendations this evening are that council authorize staff to prepare an amendment to the water and sewer utility rate bylaws to increase utility rates beginning April 1st of 2021 in order to collect the required revenue in the water and sewer fund for 2021 and to apply a 4% rate increase on January 1st of 2022. I've only included a 4% rate increase for the year 2022 because by that time or shortly thereafter, we will be coming back proposing changes, likely or possibly recommendations or changes to the current rate structure, which won't necessarily impact revenues, but it will change the proportions in which it may change the proportions in which we collect that revenue. So that future rate increase after 2022 will be addressed over the next year and brought forward to council at a later date. The second recommendation is that staff be authorized to continue the utility rate review and bring forward recommendations regarding the utility rate structures. And so that will likely come forward late in 2021 or early 2022. And I think that's all I have to say on the utility rate increase at this time. I should mention, I did not include specific dollar amounts in these recommendations. The goal and the objective here is to have council authorize staff to meet the revenue requirements in 2021. We will be coming forward with a written report explaining why we require the fee increase at the February 23rd meeting with the proposed bylaws prepared. At that meeting, we will have dollar amounts, and that gives us a little bit more time to finalize the numbers in the water fund and the sewer fund for the 2021 budget. And so I will pause there with those recommendations.
Okay, thoughts from anybody? Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, Nyla. I definitely support the recommendations moving forward, understanding that the increasing cost to deliver the service, and we need to unfortunately move forward with an increase. I just had one quick question. It was back on the slide where you had the fixed and variable rates for the different user groups, and I only flashed on it quickly, and it looked like there was a proportionately lower rate for the commercial sector on those, and I was just curious as to if that was correct or if I just misread it.
Yes, through Councillor McMaster. Yes, the rate is lower in the commercial class, but those rates were developed having a look at the demands on the system, and so we landed with a variable rate. It's also a seasonal rate, which it does increase at a certain time of year when the consumption is higher, to ensure that the revenue that we are collecting is proportionate to demand. So working backwards from that, those rates were developed to ensure that we met that objective in the rate structure. And based on the calculations that I did with the impact of this rate increase, you can very clearly see that where the high consumers are, that's where the more of the increase to the fees will be sitting. And so that objective is still being met in the model. But yes, the actual rate per cubic meter differs. Something to keep in mind, though, is that the residential class does come, the fixed fee that is paid on a quarterly basis does come with 30 cubic meters of consumption, whereas in the commercial class, there's no consumption that comes with that fixed fee. It's just a contribution to the system. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Nyla. I agree with your recommendations. I'm just wondering about the large industrial users, the fish plants. Were those captured in your presentation? I wasn't sure.
Yes, so those users of the system are in the commercial and other class. So in the residential class, it's just purely single family residential, duplex, or strata that may receive or have individual water meters. There's a select few. So in the commercial and other class, those users under this current rate structure will pay at that higher rate per cubic meter because the consumption level is oh, sorry, they will pay seasonality rates and they will pay the winter rates as established. And in the previous rate structure prior to 2015, the rate structure was that those users would pay less because they consumed more. And so we fixed that in this current rate structure.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chalmers, do you have anything?
I'm supportive of the recommendations.
I just have a question. Why do we continue to charge for sewer 90% of the water rate?
Yes, that I should have mentioned that in my presentation, is that it's still a standard practice in that 90% of the water is going through the sewer system. And because of that, a lot of municipalities do base their sewer rate on their water rate. We're going to have to change that because in a few years here, our sewer system is going to going to cost far more than our water system. And so that's one thing we're going to have to start looking at over this next year and into 2022 to figure out how those fees will be, whether they will or will not be tethered to the water rate or not, and if so, by what percentage. But we need to make sure we have an objective that is based on, and right now that is based on that 90% of the water is going through the system.
Yeah. So it's not legislated that it has to be 90%. Because, you know, as like you mentioned, it's costing more and more to treat sewage and transport it. And that's before we've even got the liquid waste management plan. And I just wondered whether we should be charging the same right now, and then how that would affect the rate increase.
Charging the same as water right now?
Yeah, and see, would your rating and then still have a rate increase, which would that bring it down to 2% or something like that?
Well, when I bring forward rate increases and work with the relevant director or manager on that, I make sure that that the revenue that we're collecting is what we require, and that we're not budgeting in a way that we're not collecting enough revenue and having to not do things because of that. So this budget was put together very realistically and with a lot of knowledge and consultation with the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works. At 90% of the water rates, we both feel confident that the revenue requirements that we will have in place will meet the operating requirements. So at this point, I don't see that it's necessary to match it up with that water rate.
Okay, well, I'd like you to think about it, because it's going to happen eventually, as you say.
Yeah. Eventually, I think we're going to have to be collecting. We will be collecting more than what we're collecting for water. I very much want to make sure that we are collecting based on our revenue requirements and less thinking about how those two fees relate to one another.
And I know in Australia they meter what goes in and what comes out. Mm-hmm. And I've mentioned this to Bob. I would really like to do a test on one of the big resorts, just to see what the difference is. And if there was if we ever had any money to put in a meter on a couple of the resorts, just to see what the difference, I think that would help us down the road. But I will support the rate increase as it is.
Okay.
So would someone like to make the recommendation?
Are you able to put it back on the screen, Nyla?
Yes.
I'll move that council authorize staff to prepare an amendment to the water and sewer utility rate bylaws to increase utility rates beginning April 1st, 2021 in order to collect the required revenue in the water and sewer fund for 2021 and to apply a 4% rate increase on January 1st, 2022. Do I read them together or are they separate?
They're separate.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
Second,
Okay. All those in favour? Can't see everybody, but I presume
Yes.
everybody's got.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
None opposed, motion carried.
I'll move,
Carry
that
on,
staff,
Bert.
I'll move that staff be authorized to continue the utility rate review and bring forward recommendations regarding utility rate structures.
It's a yes from me.
Seconded and yes.
yes,
Councillor Anderson, is that a yes as well?
yes.
Okay, motion is carried, none opposed. Thank you.
Okay, I promise that we are almost at the end here. I just have a few more slides. So this is the point in the presentation where I bring forward early budget approval recommendations. If council recalls throughout the presentation over the last couple days, staff have highlighted where they will be requesting early budget approvals. The project slides included it and the budget items. So I've provided a summary here for those, and then I have a recommendation which I can read out once I finish going through them. So just a reminder of all the projects. I'll just read through them. Website redesign is for $35,000 in 2021. There are some costs for future years. So what we're looking for is early budget approval for the entire project so we can get started on the project, with the exception of Mackenzie Beach Road. That will be a little bit different. So I'll talk about that in a moment. I've provided the funding sources on the right-hand side. So the website redesign is coming from taxation. The two reservists we are requesting early budget approval from, and the funding sources on this one is incorrect. It should be the COVID Restart Grant. We'd still like to get early budget approval even though it's not coming from taxation. We have the housing needs assessment for $83,000. A portion is coming from taxation, so we'd like approval on that to get started. Skate park repairs and resurfacing for $92,000. That is coming from the infrastructure levy, the parks and recreation category. We have pay parking and permit program, which is the program that was discussed yesterday. It sounds like council was supported in moving forward. Some of those costs that are proposed in year 2021, which we're proposing would be fully recoverable from revenues, include the work that we need to do to further the program along so we can come back to council with more information. So this is not authorization to just move forward with the project, but it's to keep on moving with the project. The asset management plan, $65,000 in year 2021 and in future years, and it's funded by sewer and water and a portion from taxation. Of course, those the reason for that is the assets are spread over the general water and the sewer fund, so we're splitting the cost. For Mackenzie Beach Road, the discussion was a little bit different today than it was yesterday. My impression is that we were going to keep that budget in the financial plan, but in year 2022. So I quickly, before today's presentation, split it out so that we could get approval to complete the design in 2021. For $31,000, and then it would be funded out of reserve funds. I think I heard from council earlier is to leave the capital costs out of the budget for now, and so you're certainly not giving early budget approval for that full project. It would just be to continue with design. I have a few more on the other slide, and then I can pause with the recommendation. Safety delineators of $75,000 in 2021 and in the following year, and that's funded by grants and gas tax. District water and water master plan for $100,000 from the capital and infrastructure levy. public works safety equipment of 11,000. That's coming from taxation. Akmoxis treatment critical repairs are required for 27,000 for 100% out of water charges, and the lift stations 11 and 12 require valve replacements for 60,000, again 100% from sewer charges. So the recommendation is that the early budget approvals as presented by staff at the February 11th, 2021 special council meeting be approved.
I'll move that recommendation.
Second.
All those in favour? That's a yes from me.
Yes.
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 None opposed. Motion carried.
Okay, and I would like to go over the next steps in the budget process and talk about a proposed timeline to complete the process. So we are quite far along in the financial planning process, much further along than we normally are at this stage. I've been trying for 10 years to do this, and I've finally succeeded this year with the addition of additional staffing resources and a excellent management team supporting us along the way. We've been able to deliver on a balanced financial plan today with some minor edits that are required, but it is more or less complete. The benefit of being where we are at today is that we are going to be able to present a proposed or a financial plan bylaw to council early, so we can get started on our work plans and ensure that we meet those procurement windows that ensure that the pricing is as best as we can get in the market when we go out. So we are proposing the following next steps in the timeline. So public consultation will be released tomorrow on the new platform for public consultation. It'll be available from February 12th to the 23rd, and the feedback will be compiled and presented to council, and I'll talk about when in a moment. The pending items that we're waiting for are the agency requisitions, which allow us to update the amounts in the financial plan, which is not necessarily critical to have those dollar amounts be exact. What they're more important for is to use those amounts to establish the tax rates and get them in the tax rate bylaw. So the revised assessment roll is also critical in finalizing our tax rates and that non-market change number I mentioned earlier, and we're going to receive that in late March. So those two pending items are required to be able to bring and finalize the tax rate bylaw forward to council. So having said that, we're looking at this proposed timeline, and I would like to hear from council about whether they agree or disagree with this timeline. So on February 23rd, we will be bringing the utility rate amendment bylaws forward to council. At that meeting, I will also bring more discussion about the capital and infrastructure levy, and hope to receive some direction from council on where to go with that so I can finalize it in the financial plan. On March 1st, we are proposing a special meeting where we can present a summary of our consultation process and then seek authorization to prepare the financial plan bylaw and the tax rates bylaw. That would be based on all the information presented to date and the consultation feedback that has been received by council. On March 9th, at the regular council meeting, we'd like to introduce and recommend adoption of the financial plan bylaw all in one meeting. We are under a ministerial order where we still have the ability, due to the pandemic, to be able to introduce and adopt budget bylaws and tax rate bylaws, as well as fees and charges bylaws all in one meeting. So similarly, we would be doing that with the utility rate bylaw on February 23rd. The tax rate bylaw, however, will come forward later in April once the revised roll is received and all the other agency taxes are finalized. So those finalized tax rates won't impact the financial plan bylaw. The benefit of adopting that financial plan bylaw earlier than the tax rate bylaw is it gives us the authority to spend the funds in the manner that we have laid out over the last couple days here, and we can get started on a couple months earlier on delivering our work plans and meeting council's strategic priorities. So I will stop sharing my screen there because this is my last slide. And I just want to make sure council feels comfortable with the timeline that staff has laid out to complete the financial planning process.
Does anyone have any issues? Councillor Anderson, you had your hand up.
No issues. I have a couple of questions, just general though.
Okay, go ahead.
I was wondering if, are we continuing at this point with the business license inspector and the program that we had set out for license inspection of short-term rentals, or is that sort of a lesser priority of council and no longer kept up with?
Chief Baker.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, at this point, we definitely are continuing on with the business license inspector program as it has been for the last couple of years. It's a very time and labor intensive position that we've managed to gain a lot of ground on it. And I think it's very critical that we do maintain that position at this time. Okay,
good. That's, I just didn't hear it specifically mentioned, so I didn't know where it was. And the other one, I'll leave it for now. That's not important. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Steer, you had your hand up. No. Councillor Chalmers, you're happy with the schedule? I mean, everybody's happy, Nyla. Not that happy.
Okay. Yeah. I am aware of the time, and we do have some budget discussions for the closed meeting. Bob, I don't know if you if we should move forward with that, or we could also defer it to the next council meeting.
I'll look to council. We probably have half an hour or so to go.
Okay,
I don't think we have any. I don't think we have any great urgency. I mean, that council meeting is 12 days from today, and I think we're still okay for budget preparation and the schedule that we just talked about. If it's 12 days from now, Nyla, is that fair to say? So if council is feeling like your best energy is kind of behind you, we can certainly defer that to a closed meeting in 12 days.
I would love to defer it.
I'd kind of like to defer it myself, actually.
Yeah, after 2.5 hours of ACRD meetings today, I'm ready for a deferral.
That's spineless whining.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead with it tonight then.
No, I'm happy to go with the trend here to defer it, since we are a little ahead of schedule overall.
So I think I just, before anyone changes their mind, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Seconded. All those in favour? Unopposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.